Hi everyone. Alright, so I was planning to talk about some thyroid related issues today, and something in the news cycle kind of got in the way. I've had several of you message me on Facebook and say, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. And so I decided it was probably time to weigh in. Several other people in my industry have issued statements, articles, videos about the same thing. So you're probably going to be seeing several reactions from various people if you follow more than me. Why would you? But some of you do. Anyway, so the American Heart Association has now come out and said that coconut oil and butter are bad for you and that you should give those up and start consuming margarine and canola oil again. And yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. Most of the people in my industry were kind of caught off guard by this because that's been refuted repeatedly. I mean, it's kind of just a given now. Everybody knows that for the past, 30, 40, 50 years, we've been pushing this whole, well, not we, they have been pushing this whole low-fat, high-carbohydrate, and that the fake fats like margarine and Crisco and stuff like that are better for you than the naturally occurring fats. We really knew all along that that was not the case. It was difficult to really get any traction with people trying to prove that that was invalid because there was so much money behind it. Once Ansel Keys came out and basically said, I think, fat's the problem and cholesterol's the problem and that causes heart disease, then this whole big machine kind of clicked into motion, creating all these fat-free, high-carb products and all of it. Once you have that much money flowing and the agricultural industry switches more production to grain and away from vegetables, and now we're growing corn to make corn oil and all this stuff, now we're genetically modifying it, all of a sudden reversing that and going in a different direction is not likely to happen smoothly. So the tide had kind of been turning over time, and people in kind of the more natural end of the industry had been kind of preaching this for years, that this isn't the answer, this is misguided, the science doesn't fit. But there are billions of dollars being made on that theory or that philosophy every year, just here in the US. So now with the paleo movement, and kind of the organic and the natural and staying away from GMOs, all of that kooky stuff that we weird people that want to be healthy do and promote. With all of that, and now you're starting to see this I don't know, if you're in the industry like me, you're starting to see that diets like the ketogenic diet are gaining more popularity, the metabolic theory of cancer, which is more about how you're fueled and the health of the cell membranes and the type of fats and oils that you consume, rather than this DNA damage model that's been pushed for so long. There is this whole trend toward consuming healthier fats in higher amounts and lowering the carbohydrate intakes and getting rid of the refined carbohydrates and getting off sodas and not eating as much bread and the whole gluten-free push. All of that with all the autoimmune diseases, I think that has kind of started making waves in this kind of agribusiness industry. And so all of a sudden, here comes the American Heart Association really kind of out of nowhere saying that, yeah, coconut oil's always been bad. It's got saturated fat in it, and that leads to increased cholesterol, and that will give you heart attacks and kill you. And they have reached all the way back to the 1970s and 1960s and dusted off a PR report and sent it out. I mean, some of us thought this had to be an accident, right? Somebody sent out an old form and it just didn't make sense. But they're serious. They've kind of confirmed it. They're like, yeah, no, we're not kidding. This is real. The science doesn't support it. to go away from natural things like coconut oil, grass-fed butter, and to go to the fake stuff. The science isn't there. It wasn't there 30 years ago. It's not there now. Saturated fat doesn't lead directly to increased LDL, and LDL doesn't lead directly to heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. The links aren't there. A great book, there are several, but the one that comes to mind that I recommend to some of my patients, it's kind of a small book, it's a quick read. It's called The Paleo Cardiologist. And that actually goes through not only what's healthy for you now, but it goes through a lot of how we ended up here, how this science became the marketing. And for those of you that aren't familiar with science and marketing having issues and inbreeding and all of that, go back to a video I did a couple of weeks ago, Facebook Live, where I talk about, can we still trust science? Is science still science? That'll be a good one for you to read. We have different kinds of saturated fat, for one thing. There are saturated fats that occur naturally in animal products like eggs and beef and chicken and lamb and elk and venison and fish and whatever else. Those all have saturated fats in them. And then there are saturated fats that started out as unsaturated and were chemically hydrogenated to make them saturated because they become much more stable. When you saturate them, they can sit on store shelves longer and not go rancid. When you're doing research into saturated fats, are you using the chemically saturated fats, or are you using the ones that were naturally saturated? And if you're using the naturally saturated ones, are you using tallow from farm-raised or industrial-raised beef, or are you using the tallow from grass-fed beef? You can pick crappy saturated fat to do your study, or you can pick good quality saturated fat, and it all depends on the message you're choosing to promote. So first of all, the science isn't the science we thought it was, right? We don't have this pure, unbiased search for the truth science that we used to have. Everybody's got an agenda. So that's an issue. We also have the issue with the marketing end of it, which is what I saw the other day, and I'll call them out. The one I happened to see it on here in Houston was Channel 26. But I think all the stations ran it because when the American Heart Association issues a press release, everybody runs it. They're one of the most effective lobbying agencies around. So they issue a press release, and the person comes on the news and says, breaking news, the American Heart Association says, don't eat this coconut oil stuff anymore and grass-fed butter and all that. It's going to kill you. Eat margarine. It's the safer choice. But where's the other side of that? Why don't we have a reporter that reads the press release and says, look, I got a press release from the American Heart Association that says that blah, 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 but I've got nutritionists over here that say that that's BS. Where's the answer? Well, because they want to keep their advertising dollars and they want to keep their sponsors happy, there are certain toes they can't step on, and the pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest. So they can't come out and say, here's the press release, but we don't think that's really legit. They just give the press release the way they're told to give it, and that's that. Because everyone from Monsanto to Archer Daniels Midland to Merck and Pfizer and all the other, they can just simply make a call to Fox Corporate and say, hey, we're going to pull our ads for a month. And the stations say, well, we can't afford that. We won't make payroll. Then don't run the rest of the story. And they truncate what they say, and they just issue the press release, and off it goes. I know that sounds very jaded, but there's story after story of people talking about how the news cycle works, and we're well aware that that's the case. And if a grass-fed beef farmer wanted to say, hey, you can't run that story, he's got no clout. He doesn't pay for advertising. So be aware that what you're presented in the media is what you're supposed to be presented in the media. It's not always a well-researched, both sides of the story kind of presentation. Cooking with saturated fat. I keep hitting the desk and shaking the video. I'm sorry about that. I'm upset. So cooking with saturated fat. Saturated fat's a much more stable fat than unsaturated. It has a higher smoke point. For example, cooking in butter versus cooking in coconut oil, right? Butter can't handle as much heat as coconut oil. Olive oil can't handle as much heat as coconut oil. But coconut oil, avocado oil, those can handle much higher heat. Peanut oil can handle a much higher heat for that matter. But coconut oil has different constituents in it that make it considerably more healthy for us than some of the other saturated fats. Not all saturated fats are equal. So I would encourage you, I'm not going to go through all of what's available here in the time frame I have to do this video, but I would encourage you to go to Mercola.com, naturalnews.com, go to Dave Asprey's website, The Bulletproof Diet. Go to the natural health people that you trust and read some of their articles. Books like The Paleo Cardiologist. Read Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. Go through any of the ketogenic diet cookbooks that are out there. There are books like Tripping Over the Truth, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. There are lots of resources right now on the benefits of fats. Mary Enig, E-N-I-G, prolific author on the quality of fats and the types of fats and what we used to consume and what we consume now and what the differences are and what industrial fats have done to us over the years. But what it basically boils down to is animal products have saturated fat in them. We have eaten animal products for millennia. Now, granted, our animal products now are a different quality than what we used to have. Right? Cows didn't used to be force-fed grain until they were big and fat and sold by weight at the market. Cows ate grass and we snuck up on them and ate the cows. But in a grander sense, we wouldn't be here if saturated fat was the root of all our problems. Now, what we never had before were refined carbohydrates. Those are new. The carbohydrates we had were root vegetables and fruits. Maybe you convinced the not so bright person in your hunting and gathering tribe to go knock down the beehive, and then you eat the honey. That's about as sweet as it got, and that wasn't very common. But now we have highly processed, refined foods available 24 hours a day. No break, no fasting, no hunting, no working. It just shows up and we eat it. And it's junk food. I mean, literally, it's not what it used to be. That's the bigger problem. Not saturated fat versus unsaturated fat, not coconut oil versus other things. Margarine is not a food. I'm sorry, it's just not. It's fake. It's a contrived, scientifically produced fat-like product, and it's not food. And to tell us that we need to switch back to margarine is insane. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. There are lots of articles out there. One of the better ones, I'm holding in front of me, from an author named Jack Wolfson, who is the author of The Paleo Cardiologist, real quickly points out a couple of things. So I'm going to quote from his article. You're welcome to go find it. I think this was posted on naturalnews.com, but I'm not positive. I don't have that on there. But Jack Wolfson, you'll be able to find it if you Google it. Jack Wolfson and American Heart Association, you'll find the article. 2010, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition published, they looked at a study, they looked at over 500,000 people, and they figured out that saturated fat had nothing to do with coronary artery disease or heart attacks. 2016, same journal, there was a study that found out that saturated fat actually lowers your risk of heart attacks. 2015, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reported saturated fat is linked to heart disease unless it came naturally from fish, dairy, plants, those kinds of things. And then they put a caveat in there that said it's really likely that the effects we saw of saturated fat were because of everything else that was in the food with the saturated fat, not the saturated fat itself. And then you also have to look at whether it was chemically saturated or whether it was saturated from the beginning. And I mean, that's just a tidbit of the science that's been out there. There was another big study, I think, or at least an editorial letter in the British Medical Journal that came out within days of the American Heart Association making this decision, that basically blasted them and said, oh my gosh, they got it wrong again. They got it wrong 50, 60 years ago. They've been wrong all along, and they're getting it wrong again. There's tons of evidence. And when you look on social media, they're losing. Whoever the PR person is for the American Heart Association, I think there's going to be an opening there, because enough people are informed enough this time around that it's not going to be easy for them to pull this stunt again. Generally, people are just way too savvy for that now. There's so much information out there to the contrary. They're not going to be able to pull it off, but they're trying. So be informed, look around, read some articles, pull up some research, talk to people that know what they're doing, talk to nutritionists. You're going to get some that agree with me. You're going to get a few that disagree with me. It's very easy to just take the party line and say, hey, if the American Heart Association says it, it must be true. Well, it hasn't been true for a long time and it's still not true now. Anyway, feel free to pass this around, leave your comments as usual. With this one, I have a feeling I'll be on again tomorrow answering some questions, so I'm happy to do it. But let's start up a conversation. Maybe next week I'll get back to the regular cycle of what I was going to talk about. We were going to talk about some gluten-free thyroid kind of relationships and a situation that happened with another doctor recently. So we'll get to that. But this was something I just needed to talk about today. So if you have any questions, let me know. Put them in there. Otherwise, until next time, you know what I always say. Eat for your health, train for performance, and live the life you love today. Thanks. Have a good one.